Can you beat Super Mario Odyssey without jumping? Well, yes. This is a topic very extensively talked about and has been completed by hundreds of people, with some of them even doing post-game. So you might wonder why I'm here. Something always irked me about jumpless challenges. As most people will know, the jumpless challenge isn't truly jumpless. While Mario may finish the challenge with the statistic menu saying 0 jumps, there's so many different types of jumps that don't add to the counter, so that's why I'm here. In this video, I want to complete the Super Mario Odyssey Jumpless challenge, where I used the allowed jumps as little as possible. As you may suspect, this is impossible to use them 0 times, so all I'm here for is using these types of jumps as little as possible. Just a little bit of further information of what counts as a jump. For the intents of this playthrough, I will be minimizing jumps as captures. This doesn't mean I'm not allowed to gain height from captures, so using pylons and the flick-ups as Pokeos are allowed. However, they will still be minimized. I will be minimizing wall jumps. This is anything where I slide down a wall and press the jump button. I'm also going to be avoiding pole jumps as much as possible. At least for this section, I'm completely banning jumping in quicksand and pressing the jump button to swim. Those are all self-made rules. For the actual rules, I'm not allowed to jump as Mario, I'm not allowed to backflip or side flip as Mario, I'm not allowed to jump at the surface of the water as Mario. One more final tiny aspect before we get into the run. In the scenario that I need to avoid one of the jumps I mentioned earlier, I will have an order of favourability of which jumps I can use to avoid a different jump. For now, the jump I want to avoid the most is a jump as a capture. Most jumps apart from that I consider at a similar level, but on screen is my ranking of jumps to avoid. That's all from me, let's get into the actual game. Cap Kingdom starts off exactly the same as every other jumpless challenge up until Frog Room, where we find our first hurdle. On a normal jumpless, or even just a normal playthrough, you'd capture a frog and jump across the water and elevated platforms. But due to this challenge, we don't have that privilege. The main way to gain height in this challenge is through Cappy vaulting. This can be done by either walking into Cappy, rolling into Cappy, or diving into Cappy. This gets you a bit more height than a normal jump, but less than a triple jump. So now we have to make it up this first platform just using a Cappy vault and a wall jump. Unfortunately in the scenario, you're forced into either using a capture jump with the frog or a wall jump without captures. I chose the wall jump. After a couple of attempts, I made it up top and could carry on. This is the tallest elevation in the sub area and is therefore the only real challenge. After this, there's just Topper, which is still very trivial even without jumping. Cascade isn't much different to a normal speedrun. At least for my level. All I needed to do was avoid the 2D section, as it would be difficult and annoying to complete jumpless. So, using my vast knowledge of speedrunning strategies, I used Dino Skip, which doesn't require jumping. Apart from that, Madame Broodal was easy, and getting the 5th and final moon was also no problem. Sand is the first non-linear kingdom, where you can pretty much explore the entire kingdom and do any sequence of moons you desire, so hopefully this means it will be easy. Since we have all this freedom, I figured I'd stick to collecting moons I'm familiar with, and I'd follow the speedrun route I normally use. Because of this, I'm forced into a mixture of easy moons, and moons that are really difficult that I could avoid. However, Sand Kingdom was extremely trivial, with the only moon I skipped being the secret quicksand room moon. And this is just because I'm really bad at the out of bounds clip. Lake Kingdom actually gets changed a lot compared to normal gameplay and normal jumpless. Because of my rules, I wasn't allowed to swim using the jump button, nor was I allowed to swim using the Cheep Cheep, so I could only go down while swimming as Mario and as a fish. In actuality, this doesn't change much of the gameplay, since the 3 underwater moons I get involve going down, and I can just teleport to a checkpoint to reach Rango. This kingdom would be quite interesting for an all moons run, but pretty unchanged for any percent. Wooded Kingdom was next, and truthfully, I didn't follow the spirit of the rules. While technically gaining elevation as an up route, I didn't count it as jumping, but it goes against what this challenge is meant to be. But this kingdom just had so much elevation, and I was kinda lazy. So I used so many up routes, I also skipped Flooded Pipes, Shop Moon and Tree Moon because they seemed really annoying to do, so then I did Spirit and the Nutclip Moons. Cloud Kingdom could be hard as you're unable to use Cappy when inside the White Hat. However, only one part of this fight requires you to jump, and it's extremely easy to just walk behind it. Lost is another kingdom that should be extremely difficult, probably impossible, but due to Klepto Skip, there's pretty much no real issue, and all the moons were easily grabbable. Night Metro is a pretty annoying kingdom for normal Jumpless, as it's a linear passage towards the Town Hall area, which for me, I wasn't able to do the normal speedrun strats, and instead I had to go around the buildings like a normal player. This was fine, but slightly annoying. However, the main problem was the Town Hall. It's not actually too hard, but from a bit of testing, I couldn't find any way to make it up without using a pole jump, and because it was already necessary, I decided to get the City Hall Lost and Found Moon while I was there. After City Hall, it was just a pylons ride up to Mecha Wiggler, which is unchanged to being unable to jump. Now that we're in Day Metro, we don't need to complete any story moons, and it's just a free playground of collecting moons. I still wanted to follow my normal any percent route, but I was scared of talking to people, as I know if you do it wrong, it counts as a jump. Because of this, I avoided the bench moon. But I did actually struggle quite a lot with finding moons, and I ended up talking to all the musicians in the end. As long as you go into first person mode while talking to an NPC, it won't count as a jump. Apart from that, I collected a couple other random moons and went on my way to Snow. Snow is actually a really interesting kingdom for this run. At least, kinda interesting. Normally in a speedrun you'd buy a shop moon, and you'd do Snow Jam. However, those were both annoying, so I want to avoid them. You'd also get the Goomba Pressure Plate Moon, but that requires jumping as a Goomba. And you'd also talk to Captain Toad, and I was still scared of talking to people, so I avoided that. That's 4 moons I need to make up. To start with, I got the entrance to Shiveria Moon, which is really easy. Then I did Poison Room, getting both moons. Still pretty easy. I got the Story Moon in the Goomba Room, which can be made doing an easy vault to the platform. I got the Secret Moon in Rango, which kinda violates the challenge by gaining height from the blowing geysers, but I don't think it's a big problem. Then I got both the Story and Secret Moon in the Shard Room, but that's only 7 moons, and was all the easy moons I could think of. Since I was avoiding pole jumping and wall jumps, making it up top to the balcony is difficult. But not impossible. There's a weird ramp on the balcony which Mario is able to dive onto and regain another cap bounce. This trick is kinda precise, but after a couple minutes I got it and was able to get the chest moon and the ground pound moon. However, I'm still only at 9, so I gave up and just did Rango. I wanted to avoid Rango because I felt like it'd be an annoying fight, and I was right, but it was still easy. Snow was probably the most annoying kingdom so far, but it's now over. Considering Seaside is a kingdom of water and gushions, you'd expect this kingdom to suck, and in some ways it did. I had to differ from the speedrun route twice in the first minute, due to them being designed to be collected by gushions that we normally collect with wall jumps. But after this, I just went into the water with no real plan, captured a Cheep and started swimming. Pretty much all the moons I wanted were going downwards, so I didn't need to dive up as the Cheep and just teleported back once I was done. That was pretty much all of note. I just collected some other random moons and left. Luncheon is next. Luncheon is a pretty weird kingdom. It's very much an open world kingdom, however it requires specific story progress to unlock half of the kingdom. Unlike Sand Kingdom or Metro Kingdom where you can go pretty much anywhere you want and do anything pre-piece, Luncheon intends the player to do a lot of the story for unlocking half the kingdom. Because of this, I kinda needed to progress the story. Luckily the Spirit fight was no problem similarly to the Wooded fight, but the Meat Moon was different. You have to capture the meat and press the B button multiple times where at the end it starts jumping. Because of this, I wanted to go through the kingdom collecting different moons to try and avoid this easy triple moon. Even after exploring all of the map and collecting moons from weird places I'd never go in the speedrun, I didn't get enough moons. I think there's probably enough moons if I looked harder, but I eventually gave in and just got the Meat Moon. Ruined was no problem, as the dragon fight is really easy. I did have to do a second phase for the third hit, which I've never gotten before. I had no clue this even existed, so I guess you learn something new every day. Bowser's is a disappointing kingdom. To get to each new island, you need to use pylons. Most of these are changing elevations and going upwards, which completely goes against the challenge. I'm aware that people from min caps and such can use CRCs to get through each island and complete Bowser's without using the pylons. However, I wasn't going to learn how to CRC for this video, and pylons are barely cheating. Outside of that, I really struggled with the topper fight, With all the hats around the arena, you couldn't cappy vault easily and I almost died. Unfortunately, I also had to use Pokeos to climb the 2 walls in Bowser's. I made sure to never actually jump as a Pokeo and just use it as a slingshot, however it still felt wrong. I was expecting Mecha Broodal to be a big problem, as normally you'd use a Pokeo to gain height, but you have enough time to just knock it down and make it up as Mario without jumping or using the Pokeo. With all of that out the way, I'm at the final kingdom, Moon Kingdom. Immediately there's an annoying problem. I can't really do Mooncave skip. Normally in a speedrun you can wall jump twice going up this wall due to a weird texture allowing you to make it to the top of the mountain without going inside the Mooncave. However, that obviously requires wall jumping and a ground pound jump to gain the height. Because of this, I have to go into Mooncave and complete it. This does require gaining a height with pylons, but I think that's less impactful and less of a jump than a wall jump. There's not a lot to talk about Mooncave. It's quite long and boring, with not much difficulty. I used a bonsai bill, but I didn't gain height, so it doesn't really matter. I had to roll and cap jump off the ledges to avoid the rocks, and then the Madame Broodal fight was trivial. Now, ironically, onto the most difficult part of this challenge. The final Bowser fight is pretty hard jumpless. Just like in Cloud, you're unable to throw Cappy while you have a Bowser hat on, and unlike in Cloud, every time Bowser wags his tail, he spews out a ring of fire and he wags his tail a lot. So, you need to pretty precisely time your roll to make sure you don't get hit. Admittedly, I found this pretty hard, taking about 15 minutes to complete, but that's mostly because I spent those 15 minutes trying to roll over his tail instead of the fire. Once I learned about the rings of fire, it became much easier. Still difficult though. Now, onto the main issue that killed a lot of original Jumpless challenges. You have to press the jump button to start the escape sequence, but I assume most of you knew that. And you know that the only way to avoid that is to use 2-player and jump with Cappy. Then obviously you can't beat the escape sequence without jumping as Bowser, so I just kinda jumped. I didn't care to minimize my jumps when I'm using a capture, especially in a scripted sequence like this. After doing all that, I finished the run. I completed this challenge with 0 official jumps. Most people would be happy about that. I made another Toadette stat with a 0, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make Jumpless harder and more actually jumpless. For this run, I required 1 wall jump in Cap Kingdom. This was for Frogless and it avoided a capped jump. There was 1 pole jump in Night Metro. This is impossible to avoid from my knowledge. Then there was a lot of jumping as Bowser during the escape sequence, which is also impossible to avoid. Outside of all that, there's a couple sections in this game where I broke the spirit of the challenge. These are anytime I used a pylon, when I used Pokeo to climb the walls, using uproots in wooded, geysers in snow, and so on. Throughout this game, apart from as Bowser, I never pressed B while in a capture, and only used different sources to gain elevation. So in my eyes, this is barely a fail, but I'd appreciate the criticism. Jumpless postgame has been completed by a lot of people, most notably being started by GameChamp, but I think I could continue this jumpless but harder challenge into postgame, like I did with Coinless, but this time I'd actually finish making it before another YouTuber does it better than me. I quite enjoyed this playthrough, but I don't know if I recommend other people doing it. One of the main reasons I love Mario Odyssey so much is spin pounds. I could run around spin pounding for hours, and this challenge got rid of that.